Welcome back to the channel. Let's talk about the crisis Donald Trump pretended was a talking point, while everyone else knows it's a countdown clock. I want you to imagine this not as an abstract climate seminar, but as a map of power. On one side, the American West, Lake Mead scraping record lows, the Colorado River carved into rationing zones, over 40 million people tied to a water system that is literally evaporating. On the other side, sitting on nearly 20% of the world's freshwater reservoirs and lakes that look from Washington's perspective less like nature and more like inventory. That's the real backdrop when Trump opens his mouth about maybe getting water from Canada. He doesn't say it as a philosopher. He says it like a landlord who's run out of cash and starts eyeing the neighbor's wallet. Because here's the truth. This didn't come out of nowhere. For years, U.S. policymakers ignored every red flag. Western states overbuilt suburbs in deserts, greenlit water-hungry crops, subsidized factory farms, and golf courses like water was infinite. Under Trump, that addiction was supercharged. Rollbacks on environmental protections, subsidies for agribusiness, and a climate agenda written by fossil fuel donors. The result? A West that burns in summer, floods in winter, and dries out in between. So when Trump casually floats the idea that the U.S. could turn to Canada for water, it's not just a question, it's a confession. It's the most powerful country on earth saying out loud, we mismanaged our own lifeline so badly that now we're thinking about importing survival. And that's exactly why Ottawa exploded. Because in Canada, water isn't just a utility bill. It's identity, it's sovereignty. It's one of the last things the average Canadian believes their government still has a moral obligation to protect. You can privatize telecoms, you can sell pipelines, you can auction off housing to hedge funds. But the lakes, the rivers, the glaciers that literally shaped the country, that's a red line. So when Trump's comments started echoing through policy circles, the reaction from Canada's leadership was cold and sharp. Prime Minister Mark Carney didn't talk like a traitor. He talked like a guardian. He framed Canadian freshwater as a public trust, not a product, not a deal, not a great arrangement you brag about at a rally. In Carney's framing, once you turn water into an export, you don't just ship H2O, you ship control. And that's the part Trump and his circle never want to talk about because they see everything as leverage. Oil becomes leverage, tariffs become leverage, even allies become leverage. So, of course, when the American West starts to run dry, the instinct from Trump world is not, maybe we should stop building luxury resorts in deserts and subsidizing industrial greed. The instinct is, who can we lean on? Look at the numbers. Western reservoirs in some basins have dropped by 60, 70% compared to historic norms. Farm regions are being told to cut water usage by 25, 30%. Cities like Phoenix and Las Vegas are pouring billions into emergency infrastructure that buys time, not solutions. This is not a minor adjustment. This is systemic failure. And Trump's answer is to turn that failure into an external demand. What he's really saying is, we burned through our water cushion to keep growth, profits, and speculation humming. Now, Canada should help us maintain the illusion of normality. Canada's answer is no. Not with slogans, not with insults, with something much more dangerous to Trumpism. Principle, because once Canada says water is not a tradable commodity, it's part of our sovereignty, they are exposing the rot in Trump's worldview. In that worldview, everything can be monetized. Everything can be negotiated. If you just threaten hard enough, tariff high enough, insult loud enough, you can turn any moral question into a price tag. But some things break that logic. If you accept that water is a human right, not a product, you blow up the entire Trump playbook. You strip away his favorite move, turning desperation into a bargaining chip. That's why this standoff matters more than a single comment in a speech. It reveals a clash between two systems. On one side, a hyper financialized America, led by a man who thinks deal making is a substitute for planning, stewardship, and responsibility. On the other, a Canada that finally understands that if it lets people like Trump define the rules of water, it will never again fully control its own future. And in a century where who controls fresh water will decide which countries stand tall and which ones kneel, control is everything. What makes this showdown even more revealing is what happens when you follow the money instead of the rhetoric. While Trump was musing about Canadian water as if it were just another import, Wall Street was already years ahead. In the last decade, more than $150 billion in global capital has moved into water-related assets, utilities, treatment plants, irrigation systems, even water futures contracts. Under Trump, that trend didn't slow down, it accelerated. His administration gutted dozens of environmental protections, weakened the Clean Water Act, and gave corporate agriculture and real estate exactly what they wanted: permission to keep pumping, building, and profiting as if drought was a conspiracy, not a data set. So when he hints that the answer might be getting water from Canada, he's not proposing solidarity between neighbors. He's sketching a business model. Imagine how that model looks on a spreadsheet in New York. Pipeline corridors from Canadian rivers into the American West, multi-decade contracts, guaranteed returns backed by governments desperate to keep taps running. It's the perfect Trump era fantasy: public risk, private profit, and a bill handed to workers, farmers, and ordinary households, already paying more for everything. Look at the pattern. Under Trump, corporations got trillions in tax cuts and subsidies, while public infrastructure, including water systems, remained underfunded by an estimated $100, 150 billion. Rural towns in the US still drink from lead pipes and crumbling wells, even as hedge funds circle utilities like vultures. The crisis in the West didn't happen because there was no money. It happened because the money went somewhere else. And now, instead of admitting that failure, Trump's logic is, if we've exhausted our own reserves, let's pressure the neighbor who didn't. That's where Canada's response becomes more than symbolism. When Prime Minister Mark Carney says fresh water is not a tradable commodity, he's not just making a moral argument. He's shutting the door on the exact mechanism Trump world relies on, turning every crisis into a privatized opportunity. Because the moment water crosses the border as a product, it enters trade law, investor protections, arbitration courts. Suddenly, Canadian policy is no longer decided in Ottawa alone. It's litigated in tribunals where corporations have more rights than citizens. You don't have to stretch your imagination. We've already seen similar dynamics with oil, gas, and pipelines. Companies sue governments for lost profits when regulations change. Trade agreements lock in rules for decades. Once you sign, backing out is more expensive than staying in. Now transfer that logic to water, to rivers, lakes, and aquifers that entire ecosystems depend on, and you start to understand why Canada is slamming the brakes. And here's the part Trump will never acknowledge in a rally. The American water crisis is not just a story of nature, it's a story of class. When supplies tighten, who gets cut first? Not the golf courses catering to the ultra-rich, not the luxury developments with artificial lakes. It's farm workers in the Central Valley watching their jobs vanish. It's low-income neighborhoods getting rationing, fines, and shut-off notices. It's indigenous communities on both sides of the border whose rights are always too complicated when big capital wants a pipeline. Under a Trump-style regime, water scarcity doesn't produce justice, it produces hierarchy. Those at the top buy their way out. Those at the bottom get told to conserve, while billionaires fill private reservoirs and corporations sign bulk contracts at wholesale rates. Now put Canada into that picture. If Ottawa opens the tap for U.S. imports, who do you think the first big customers will be? Small towns in Arizona, family farms in Nevada, or the same agribusiness giants and real estate empires that financed Trump's politics in the first place? This is why Canada's refusal stings Trump so personally. It's not just a foreign leader saying no. It's a foreign leader refusing to play the game he understands best. Commodify everything, then let whoever has the deepest pockets decide what survival looks like. Economically, the stakes are enormous. Analysts estimate that large-scale water transfers from Canada to the U.S. could eventually be worth hundreds of billions of dollars over multiple decades. For the finance industry, that's a dream. For workers and the environment, it's a time bomb. Diverting major watersheds would mean reshaping ecosystems, displacing local communities, and locking both countries into fragile mutual dependency that benefits shareholders far more than citizens. And that's the dark irony. Trump presents these ideas as patriotic solutions, but they actually risk eroding American sovereignty. The more the U.S. relies on imported water to sustain unsustainable patterns of consumption and development, the more leverage foreign suppliers gain. The superpower that spent decades lecturing others about energy independence would be walking straight into water dependence because its leaders, Trump foremost among them, refused to challenge the industries burning through the resource in the first place. Meanwhile, Canada is quietly doing something Trump never did, thinking long term, defining water as a public trust, not a product, is not anti-American. It's anti-short-termism. It's a warning that in a century of droughts, fires, and heat waves, the countries that survive won't be the ones with the loudest leaders, but the ones that refused to sell off their last defenses. This is what makes Trump's casual talk about Canadian water so dangerous. It's not just the ignorance, it's the worldview behind it, a worldview in which every crisis is an excuse to protect profits, shift blame, and put the most basic building block of life on the auction block. And for a North America already cracking under the weight of inequality, climate stress, and political resentment, there is nothing more explosive than a system where even water flows according to Wolff. All of this forces a brutal question onto the table. When a superpower runs out of water, what breaks first, its alliances, its democracy, or its illusions? Because if you know anything about Trump's political style, you know how he handles limits. He doesn't admit them, he weaponizes them. Every crisis becomes a chance to punch down and blame someone else. Immigrants, environmentalists, foreign governments, anyone but the corporations and politicians who built the disaster. Now picture that instinct colliding with the map of Western drought as reservoirs drop and taps tighten. Do you really think Trump's message will be, we mismanaged this, we need structural reform? Or will it sound more like, Canada is sitting on lakes while Americans suffer? Environmental extremists won't let us build what we need. Other countries are laughing at us. It's the same script we saw with oil trade and immigration, now applied to the element that keeps people alive. That's why Canada's hard line is not just about policy, it's about refusing to give Trumpism a new stage. Because once water becomes the next front in his culture war, everything gets uglier. You can already imagine the talking points. Why should our farmers dry up while Canada hoards? Why are we protecting fish and forests when American families can't shower? It sounds populist. In reality, it's cover. Cover for the same extractive model that gave tax breaks to billionaires while ignoring the $1 trillion infrastructure gap at home, including basic water systems. This is where economics and geopolitics fuse. Globally, more than 2 billion people already live in regions under severe water stress. By mid-century, that could climb toward 3-4 billion if current trends hold. In that world, water-rich countries are not just lucky. They are power centers. They will decide who gets relief and who gets rationed, who negotiates and who begs. If that power is controlled by democratic institutions, there is at least a chance for justice. If it is controlled by the kind of crony capitalism Trump champions, water doesn't flow according to need, it flows according to profit. Imagine a world where water contracts look like arms deals, where aid packages come with strings that last generations, where hedge funds in New York and London quietly own pieces of river systems on other continents. That sounds dystopian, but it is exactly where Trump's logic leads. Everything for sale, everyone a customer, nothing sacred. Canada, by slamming the door on commodification, is trying to draw a line before we get there. And that's what enrages Trump's political project at a deeper level, because it exposes a weakness he can't spin away, his total inability to imagine power that refuses to cash out. In his universe, if you have leverage and you don't monetize it, you're a fool. In Canada's framing, if you have a life-giving resource and you do monetize it, you're something worse, a traitor to future generations. The clash doesn't stop at the border. Look at the map. From the Indus Basin in South Asia to the Sahel in Africa, from the Middle East to parts of Latin America, water stress is colliding with political instability. Authoritarian leaders are already learning the lesson. Trump instinctively grasps: control the tap and you control the people. Cut off supplies and you crush dissent. Promise access and you buy loyalty. Now add global markets and cross-border deals to that mix, and you get something new: water as a tool of transnational domination. That's the world Trump is training his followers to accept: a world where the rich can always find water somewhere and everyone else has to live with shortages, fines, and sermons about personal responsibility. Meanwhile, the science is uncompromising. Climate models show rising temperatures will amplify drought cycles in the American West, even under optimistic scenarios. Some studies estimate that key Western basins could lose 20-30% of their runoff by mid-century. You don't fix that with slogans. You don't fix that with one more luxury pipeline deal. You fix it with something Trump has never offered: systemic change. Change that hits powerful interests. Land use reform. Shifting away from water-guzzling crops grown in deserts purely for export profits, ending subsidies that encourage overuse, investing massively in public water infrastructure instead of tax breaks for corporations that offshore their gains, recognizing indigenous water rights that predate the modern state. All the things Trump brands as radical are, in reality, the minimum price of survival. Canada's refusal to sell water is in effect a brutal mirror held up to Washington. If you won't regulate your own greed, don't expect us to bail it out. And that's the real reason this story matters to anyone who opposes Trump, because it reveals what his politics look like when the stakes are no longer symbolic, when the crisis is not a wall or a tariff or a tweet, but the basic fact of whether taps still run. In that moment, every weakness of Trumpism is exposed: the denial, the short-termism, the obsession with deals over duties, the contempt for public goods, the willingness to sacrifice long-term security for one more news cycle of applause. Water does not care about poll numbers. It does not care about branding. It does not respond to intimidation. When aquifers are drained and rivers dry up, there is no spin. There is only physics, ecology, and time. So when Trump floats the idea that Canada should become America's emergency reservoir, and Canada answers with a hard principled no, what we are really witnessing is a preview of the 21st century, a world where those who protected their commons confront those who sold theirs off, and where the strongest weapon on the table is not a missile, but a glass of clean water. In that world, the real measure of leadership won't be who shouted the loudest. It will be who refused to turn survival itself into a business model.